All right, Johnny McGonigal. It's blue-white breakdown time, and we're going to try something a little different today. It's Monday, 1:36, and we are live. We're going live, Johnny, I think for the first time. I'm excited to do it. Obviously, there's a reason we're going live. No more Mike Yurcich at Penn State. James Franklin just met with the media up in State College to talk about that. And of course, he was hell bent on, getting some Rutgers questions that were never going to come. But Johnny, it's good to be doing this live with you. We have a lot to get to. Hopefully, the fact that we're going live, if you guys have any questions for us, let us know. If you want to join our tech subscriber base, number to call is 201-555-0123. Johnny, it was a crazy Sunday, right? Usually that's a day of rest for most people on earth, but James Franklin made a pretty bold decision. I wasn't surprised that he fired Mike Yurcich. I was surprised by the timing of it. And what do you make of it?
Yeah, Bob, it's interesting because this is something that James has never done. He's fired two coordinators before, and John Donovan, what a blast of the past that was,
Ooh.
and Kirk Soraka. Both of those happened after the season, even when it's come to position coaches being dismissed. It's been after the season. But you could argue that, yeah, while Rutgers and Michigan State in a bowl game is still on Penn State's schedule, that for all intents and purposes, for a team and program that had Big Ten title hopes, that had college football playoff hopes and national title hopes,
Yeah.
that those dreams are dead. And that part of the season is already over with losses to Ohio State. And then on Saturday to Michigan, and the offense really held Penn State back in both of those games. I know you wrote extensively about why this had to happen, this being Mike Yurcich being fired. Uh,
Hmm.
just the nuts and bolts of it: 27 points in those two losses, 5 of 30 on third down. I believe it was around 3.8 yards per play. In those two games, Drew Aller, the five-star quarterback, he
Yeah.
did not shine in either of
Yeah.
those performances. There's a lot that goes into it from an offensive standpoint, but this was a decision that I thought that James had to make as well. And you might as well do it early. And he was asked about that at his Monday press conference. He was asked about a whole heck of a lot regarding this decision with Mike Yurcich. You mentioned, him wanting to talk about Rutgers from the jump.
Yeah.
His opening statement, he mentioned, "Hey, this is in the best interest of our program moving forward. Would love to, we'll take a couple questions on it, but would love to talk about Rutgers." No one in that press conference, Bob, was interested
No.
in asking about the Scarlet Knights. It was all about Mike Yurcich.
Yeah, and it's just always. I mean, this you're right. It's a sixth OC. Just want to reassure the Penn State fans, Johnny. I know you already have something up on PennLive about possible candidates. James always has a list. I want to just reassure the Penn State fans. I'm almost 100% sure that John Donovan is not going to come walking through that door again. You guys saw that for 2 years, and it's just not fair to bring him back. I'm joking, but yeah, I'm going to have something on PennLive a little bit later today about why Mike Yurcich had to go. You can talk about stats, and you can look at the big picture and some of the numbers Penn State put up. But some of the performances, specifically against Michigan and the Ohio State game this year, with a team that's going to have some players on this offense, I think have a chance to play, for quite some time in the NFL. It's inexcusable. It really is. Penn State wasted a great defense. You mentioned the fact that they were Big Ten title contenders, national playoff contenders, and they were really, they were just really. You watch that Ohio State game in October. You watch the Michigan game without Jim Harbaugh, without a passing attack, uh, and just the fact that they were able to win. And really, Penn State was never really in it because of the offense. It just had to happen. Johnny. I don't think James was particularly thrilled to hear the Boo Birds either coming off the field against Beaver Stadium. He said that wasn't a factor, but he's a human being. I think he sensed the mood. I'm sure James wasn't happy, Johnny, but he sensed the mood of the fans. And if he had already made up his mind, he was going to push the button sooner rather than later after that.
Yeah, being on the sidelines for the final 5 minutes of that game, Bob, provided some great commentary, imagery, whatever you want to call it, for the story that I wrote after the game. F bombs, expletives, insults. Someone told James to go look for a job at East Stroudsburg, his his alma mater. I don't think that job is open, but that was kind of the tenor in Beaver Stadium on Saturday afternoon after Penn State lost to Michigan 24-15. Another loss to Michigan. Franklin is now 3-7 against the Wolverines, 1-9 against Ohio State. He mentioned that the decision to fire Yurcich, a quote unquote big part of that decision was Penn State's inability to make that jump to close the gap on those two teams in the Big Ten East. Now, of course, divisions are going by the wayside next year in the new Big Ten. The
Yeah.
12-team playoff cannot come soon enough for Penn State, but heading into that, having a new coordinator, orchestrate an offense that will still have Drew Aller at quarterback, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen at running back for their junior seasons. Some pieces on the offensive line and throughout that unit, really. And certainly they'll be hitting the transfer portal this
Yeah.
offseason. That, especially at wide receiver.
Oh yeah.
But there's plenty to still work with on this offense. And Mike Yurcich just, he couldn't get it done. It's interesting because you watch the TV copy and the offense isn't clicking. You just feel it on some drives when they get the ball. I still go back to that Ohio State game where they got the ball at the 50-yard line after that muff punt by the Buckeyes, and they're not able to even threaten to score from that point. It just felt like whether you were in the press box, in the stands, watching at home on your couch, that this Penn State offense just didn't have it when it mattered most this year.
Yeah. Johnny, I want to get to something that I just picked up on right away. And I feel like after watching James for 10 years, he said something, and I think he was really mad about it, but he was very, very calm about it. James played quarterback at East Stroudsburg, as we all know. He is a CEO. It's his world at Penn State. He's got his hands in everything. He was an OC at Maryland. He's been all over the country. He knows what goes into the job. One thing he does not like, Johnny, I think, is being ignored. He was asked about, I think, after the game, and I think even before that, he has talked about, Penn State not being able to get Drew Aller comfortable early in the games, maybe creating some easy throws to get him confidence, and maybe make the defense kind of rethink maybe their approach. Easy throws, I think, is what the question was. James was asked about it really early in the press conference, and I don't want to bore the listeners with his response, but James said, I've had a lot of conversations about what we can do to make Drew Aller's life and the offense's life easier, especially at the start of games. And he basically said all those conversations with Mike Yurcich were all but ignored. I think Mike called the game he wanted to call and not the game maybe that James felt he should be calling. And I think when you take that tact and you're Mike Yurcich and you've had success at other schools, at Oklahoma State, a little bit at Ohio State, even though I think Ryan Day was the play caller, and at Texas, if you choose that path against the good teams and it does not work, it's going to come back and bite you. I thought that was pretty telling that James admitted that. And I do think there was some friction there, not only this year, but you look back, he said some stuff about Mike Yurcich in 2021 when they lost 6 games. And he said some things about it last year. I think this was a sticking point. And I think that James thought, hey, if we're gonna win, and you can do it your way, but if we better win. And if we don't win and we get embarrassed, it's going to be a problem.
Definitely. I go back to, I mentioned being on the sidelines for the final 5 minutes of the game. That's what they allow reporters to come down for the press box and do that. And the post-game scene, after James has his a few handshakes and everything, he stood there on the field and was staring out into the abyss. I don't know if he was thinking about Mike Yurcich in that moment, but he had his arms crossed, just staring, into the skies or up in the stands for a handful of minutes, just not moving, no reaction, no facial expressions or anything. And then he goes in to an emotional and hurt locker room, talks to his team, and then comes and talks to us. And you mentioned the comments that he had about the play calling and getting a quarterback into rhythm and doing a better job in that area. He was not asked specifically about Mike Yurcich. He was asked specifically about Drew Aller and his performance. And his first thing he said was, we have to do a better job calling a game to help our quarterback. And it was in that moment, Bob, that you mentioned maybe being a little surprised that Yurcich's dismissal came on Sunday and not after the season. I know a lot of fans were surprised too, just with how James has handled his
Yep.
business from that standpoint over the years. But in that moment, when he's asked about his quarterback and
Yeah.
immediately goes and says, "Hey, the play calling was a problem," that's when it clicked for me. I better get home
Short timer. He's
early.
a short timer.
Yeah, I was like, I better get home, to Philly early on Sunday to be ready for something like this and sure enough, it came. Uh, and yeah, and James said it at that point too, in terms of the decision and why now. First of all, he said it was his decision that yes, he has to run those things
Yep.
up the ladder, with Pat Kraft, the athletic director, but he said it was his decision. And he said why now? It's something that he doesn't take lightly, but if you feel like that's the where you're going to go, the direction you're going to go. He said he's not great at faking it, and he wants to be transparent and upfront. And if you get to a point where you feel like that's the right decision, then you make it. You don't delay the decision. And so I commend him for that. And it does give him more time now to reach out to coaches, whether they're guys who are in the NFL or in
Mhm.
college, who will or won't be going to a bowl game, quarterbacks coach, coordinators, whatever the situation may be, head coaches in college, maybe. Um, he's going to be starting to do his due diligence, right? He has a list. He said he has a list, and he now over the next couple weeks, while still coaching this team and making sure you beat Rutgers and beat Michigan and get ready for a bowl game,
Yes.
it's making sure you get the right coordinator in, the sixth offensive coordinator in what will be his 11th season as Penn State's head coach. He's got to get this right. He has to get this hire right, Bob. It's of utmost importance to his future, to Penn State's future, as it goes in to the 2024 season. It's a big hire, and every coordinator hire is always big. And in an ideal world, he said that it would be great if a situation falls in his lap like Manny Diaz did.
Yeah.
When Manny was dismissed from Miami and James called him, Manny was interested. They got him hired before the bowl game and had him around the team and all that. In an ideal world, that will happen with the offensive coordinator as well, but you don't know how this is going to play out. He could have a hire in 2 weeks. He could have a hire in 2 months, preferably the former rather than the latter.
Yeah, and you said he's got to get it right. He's only gotten it right once, Johnny. And I don't know that he was his first choice, but he got it right with Joe Moorhead. But you look at just for whatever reason, you could make the argument, Johnny, that I don't know. Did Kirk Shiraka get a fair shot during the COVID year when he never got a chance? He never really got a chance on the field to get the 2020 team ready. They were basically installs on Zoom, no time with the kids. Yeah, they were not good at the start of the year. I think they started 0-5. They lost the heartbreaker at Indiana, and it just kept getting worse and worse. They had to play Ohio State early. Iowa got them. They did win their last 4 games. There was a little bit of momentum. They had some players coming back, and the minute he had a chance, he leapt at the opportunity to get Mike Yurcich here, and it just didn't go well. So I think if you're a fan, Johnny, you're like, does this guy know who the right offensive coordinator, really is? Is this really going to work? The fact that you can make the argument he's 1 for 5, as that's the batting average for the first 5. I mean, Ricky Ronnie, the Ohio State game is going to haunt him. Kirk only got 1 year. He brought John Donovan with him. Mike Yurcich, you look back at on his 36 games or whatever it is at Penn State. It's not going to be a fond memory, Johnny. So he's got to get it right, right? But he hasn't really got it right before. So I think there's a little bit of concern, Johnny, on the from the Penn State fan front. I didn't want to bring up. We got a question from our live audience, and I want to ask it to you. I'm not going to bother with the name of the person that's asking it because it's too. I don't know if it's a first initial, the first name, and then the last name run together. Here it is. Franklin is admittedly heavily involved in the offense. So what specifically is he looking to change? That's the question.
Well, I think you mentioned Joe Moorhead and the success that he had in 2016 and 2017. Yeah. And I think it's fair to say that Franklin was the least involved or the most hands-off when Moorhead was running the offense as compared to the other coordinators, offensive coordinators that have been in place at Penn State. Uh, I go back to being at practice last week. Again, it's only like a 15-minute window that we have Wednesday nights. When he was asked about Chop Robinson too after the practice, how
Yep.
did Chop Robinson look ahead of the Michigan game? And he said, well, I spent most of my time, on the offensive side of the ball, so I'll have to go take a look at the film. Like he is with the offense for the most of practices and heavily involved in that. Being a former
Hmm.
quarterback and wide receivers coach and offense coordinator, like that makes sense. That tracks, and that's going to continue here. By the way, over the next 2 regular season games and into a bowl game, without Mike Yurcich, James will be involved. He said a normal amount, but I kind of doubt that a little bit. With Jaywan Sider, the running backs coach, and tight ends coach Ty Howell sharing coordinator duties
Yeah.
for the remainder of this season. James was asked basically who's going to be calling plays, like how's that going to work out, and he said that they're both going to play a role in calling plays. Ty Howell will still be in the booth. Sider will still be on the sidelines, as has been the case this season. So we'll see who ultimately makes those calls. Danny O'Brien will be handling the quarterbacks, the highly touted analyst and former college quarterback himself, who has made a really good impression on Drew Aller and the coaching staff this season in particular. But Franklin said he will be in every quarterback's room meeting too to close this season. So to answer the question is, it depends on who he hires. Is he going to hire maybe an internal guy or someone who has been here before that he has worked very closely with in terms of the offense and building the game plan and everything? Or is he going to truly entrust someone to come in and take a hands-off approach and allow them to do their thing, like I think he did more with Joe Moorhead in 2016 and 17? And you look, obviously, they had a lot of talent on those 2 teams, but look at the success that they had in those 2 seasons. I think there's a corollary there. I think there's a correlation there. I do. So we'll see. We'll see who they ultimately hire. But there's going to be some good candidates out there. Like, this is a great job.
Sure.
Mike Yurcich was paid well. He was paid very well
Yeah.
to call plays for Penn State over the last 3 years. And there are going to be a lot of coaches jumping at the opportunity to come work with Drew Aller. And James is going to have, I think, his pick of a handful of really good candidates.
Yeah. And going back to Moorhead, I know you mentioned him. I think what worked for Moorhead did not work for Mike. And what I mean is Joe had, pretty much carte blanche to call what he wanted to call when he wanted to call it. It wasn't always pretty. They weren't great, right? Because he's always in the spread. 3rd and 1 was always a problem, but they scored points. They had program greats, or they became program greats in a big part of the offense. McSorley, Saquon Barkley, Mike Gesicki, Chris Godwin for a year. That always helps when there's nothing, when you need a play. Even if it didn't look good, one of those guys made the play, right? So that was it. But Mike Yurcich, I think, had that kind of authority, and he did not take the ball and run with it, so to speak. And I think James is like, well, I'm going to give you some rope. Just don't hang yourself with it. You want the authority. You better win. I think Mike did not do that, and I think it was the right call. And I think that he really, the data was out there. You could talk about the games they won. It really came down to Ohio State and Michigan. I would also say this, Johnny, 2 things. I do think at some point, I think big picture, Danny O'Brien is somebody that James Franklin wants, involved with the offensive side of the football. I know he's a young player, but James likes him. He's spoken very highly of him. I wonder how James is going to try and work Danny moving forward into the offense. Danny could get an offer somewhere else. I just wonder how much James values Danny, not only this year, not only the next couple of games, but moving forward. The other thing I have to say is you can be the best offensive coordinator on the planet, Johnny. If you don't have any wideouts in this day and age, you're really up against it. Michigan, God bless them, they were able to say, "Hey, look, I don't really care about the passing game. I don't really care about the fact that we don't have Jim Harbaugh. I don't really care that we're playing in front of 110,000 hostile fans. we're going to run the ball. And I know it's a good defense. We're going to run the ball. I don't care if it's 3rd and 11. We're going to run the ball. We believe in the offensive line's that good. We believe in the running backs. And they didn't have to score that many points. And I think they knew that too. But without wideouts, and this is by far the worst Penn State wideout room that James Franklin has had at Penn State. There's no question in my mind. Stubblefield had to go because I think James knew back in January this is going to be a struggle against the better teams on the schedule because the cupboard is close to bare. Keandre Lambert-Smith has had some good games this year. He is not a true number 1 wideout. He was number 3 for a while. This is his 4th year. Complimentary piece. We saw him from the press box against Michigan. He looked discouraged out there. He was not winning one-on-one. They have to find some difference makers to make Drew better, to make the running game better, to make the pass protection better. I think that the failure this year so far, even though they're 8-2 against good defenses, is the defenses knew that they couldn't beat them with the passing game. They just couldn't. And you look at the depth chart, I don't know that there's going to be a wideout that emerges. And I don't know what the transfer portal could bring. So I don't know when this problem's going to go away.
Yeah, Bob. One quick note on to wrap up the Danny O'Brien part of it, and then a little bit more on the receivers. With Danny, they would love to keep him past this season.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, he has impressed Drew Aller and all the quarterbacks in the room. He has impressed James Franklin and the coaching staff. To consider him for an offensive coordinator job, I think that's to make that jump to a job of that magnitude is a pretty hefty leap. They did promote Deion Barnes from analyst to defensive line coach, a fellow younger younger assistant coach that has shown a lot of promise. So James has done something similar, but offensive coordinator I think is too big of a job to make that jump. But they would love to keep Danny O'Brien involved, and I'm really interested to see how he handles the next month. Really, the 2 regular season games and then bowl prep. With Drew, with Bo, and with those guys. Wide receiver, I think a reason why they hired Marcus Hagans in the first place to replace Taylor Stubblefield is because he's known as a developer. In his time at Virginia, not only a relationships-based guy, good recruiter, all that kind of good stuff, he took a lot of 2-3-star guys that Virginia got and turned them into players who made the NFL. And so I think a part of it, a reason why he was hired, a hope from Franklin is that, hey, if we don't have the receivers that we've had in years past, but maybe even in the short term, Marcus can come in and try and work his magic and do a job for us and get these guys to a level where we can beat Ohio State and Michigan with. I don't think it's all on Marcus Hagans that those receivers were not there at that level by any means.
He's dealt a bad hand.
Absolutely. And looking forward, the portal is going to have to be big because unless you're legitimately seeing, in practice on a daily basis, things that we don't see, we only really see Saturdays, unless you are uber confident in guys like Caden Saunders and Amari Evans to take massive steps. Dante Cephas in his second year as a transfer, or Malik McLean, they're going to have to go get proven targets to really optimize and maximize what you have in Drew Aller and give him a chance. Because in the Ohio State and Michigan games, whether it was the play calling, which I do think was a big part of it, and big reason why Mike Yurcich is no longer in his role, and the wide receivers and the lack of a passing game, lack of separation downfield, lack of communication, everything. I just don't think Drew has been given a real fair chance to even beat those teams. And some of the blame falls at his feet too. I don't want to absolve him of that. And he has been the first person to say, he said after Michigan, I sucked. After the Ohio State game, and then after the Michigan game, he said I didn't play well. So he's willing to take the blame too. But something had to change on this offense. Something had to change. And something still has to change with the talent that they have at wide receiver. And if you're able to hire a really good coordinator and do so early before the transfer portal really hits into high gear around bowl season, I think that'd be a really good step for James Franklin in this program going into a very important 2024 season.
Johnny, it's a very special Blue White Breakdown live on YouTube. I hope everyone that's tuned in is enjoying what we're talking about. It's Monday. We're, about 90 minutes removed from James Franklin's presser, where he was asked almost exclusively about the offense. And he had to know. He's just like, oh, I was really hoping to get more questions about Rutgers. Come on. He's just saying that because that's the character he's created, like one game at a time. It was, I think he was actually probably having a little bit of fun with it, but the fan base doesn't really care that Rutgers is coming.
I'm surprised no one asked him about the upcoming Kirk Soraka revenge game. Kirk Soraka, for those who might not know, is Rutgers' offensive coordinator now.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
He is, and they're not coming off his finest hour either. They lost 22-0, I think, in Iowa, in just a drab, dismal game. Rutgers has never scored more than 10 points in any game against Penn State during its time in the Big Ten. They haven't won a game. They've scored 49 total points. Penn State scored 55 total points in one game last year at Piscataway. They can't score. I know the defense is probably, a little bit down, but they're going to feast against this Rutgers offense that's very predictable. I would think the Penn State's defense is going to be in a bad mood. I think the Penn State offense has plenty to play for, but ultimately, this is really not so much about the present anymore. The Big Ten title dreams died a painful death. The college playoff outside shot died a painful death at home to a team without its head coach and a passing game. The natives are restless, and they should be, and I think James is aware of that. But the record against Ohio State and Michigan is just you cannot justify it. He knows he can't justify it. He did give up a little offering, and it was the right move in getting rid of Mike Yurcich. But the problems are still there. And Johnny, you said it best. Whoever he hires had better deliver, because he does have a nice record at Penn State, but he does not have a good record against the teams he has to beat. I know that they're not going to play him every year anymore, but there are going to be some good teams on the schedule every year, and you cannot offensive no-show like this anymore with the talent that he's recruiting. So it's a big hire. James knows it. I'm really interested to see how it's going to play out. I'm interested to see how many candidates he interviews, and I just think that if he says one more time we're hunting for big plays and explosive plays and not turning the ball over, we want to score points. That's great when you score 63 points against UMass. That's great, and against Delaware. But when you have your hands full at home against Indiana, and you do this against Ohio State when they don't have Denzel Burke, and you do this at home against Michigan when they don't have Jim Harbaugh, when they looked at it and said, hey, let's just play 1972 football and run it right at them, and we're going to wear them down. When that's what you're reduced to, it's not this Mike Yurcich that has a lot of explaining to do. It's James Franklin, and that cushy contract is nice, but I just think that he's really, really, really got to get this right. And if it doesn't look different, even without a great wideout next year, it's going to be a long year for him at Beaver Stadium, just because the fans have had it.
I would like to know, Bob, if this is probably something for the off season when we're not as entrenched in what's going on here right now over the next few weeks. I would like to know how many offensive coordinators have been fired mid-season when ranked within the top 15 in scoring offense in the country, averaging, I believe Penn State's averaging 37, 38 points per game. And like you mentioned, right, UMass, Delaware, running it up on Maryland. And
sure.
So early in the season, when the offensive questions were coming, even before Ohio State, about the lack of explosive plays and everything, James kind of leaned back on, hey, what do you want from us? We have an identity. We're putting up points, and we saw now what this iteration of this offense can do against two of the best defenses in the country, and it's not a lot at all. And by the way, Bob, the early season questions about the explosive plays, boy, did they never get fixed, because Penn State ranks 130th in the FBS out of 133 or 35 teams in plays of 20 yards or more.
I knew that James was desperate about that. I asked him a couple weeks about it. and I was talking about explosive plays from the running backs and those guys, and he interrupted me and said, "Oh, by the way, just so you know, I have no problem with the question, but we don't view explosive plays as 20 or more yards. It's 15 in the passing game, and it's 12 in the running game." So then a couple days later, I looked, and they're not even good at those. If that's the criteria, they're not even good at if those are the measuring sticks. Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, unless you think explosive plays are 5 yards or more on the run and 8 yards or more in the passing game, they ain't cutting it.
No, not at all. I mean, the explosive plays were not there really all season long, whichever metric or stat, whatever range you want to use, 15, 16, 18 yards, 20 yards, whatever. They were not there all season long. We saw glimpses of what Drew Aller can be against, for the most part, inferior competition against superior competition, or competition that Penn State would like to be on the same level as. He did not perform well for all the reasons that we've already laid out. Him, play calling, receivers, everything. I thought Katron Allen should have been involved more, especially at Ohio State. Only getting 9 carries. It was just, this was a 2-game season for Penn State, really, coming into it, because you knew that while Iowa and West Virginia, those night games would have a lot of juice and expectation around them because of the atmosphere, you knew that the season was going to be defined by how do you play against Ohio State, Michigan, and can you beat either of them? You didn't even have to beat both of them. Just beat one of them.
Just one.
And they couldn't do it. And the offense was the primary issue. And that's why we're sitting here, Bob, at 2:07 on Monday, and Penn State has 2 interim co-offensive coordinators and not one full-time offensive coordinator. And James is going to be on the phone quite a bit, whether that's, calling guys up saying, "Hey, you interested?" Or, his phone's going to be ringing with people interested in the gig. He's going to be on Zoom talking to people. He's going to have people come in for in-persons, NFL, college types. Every rock should be turned over in this OC search as James Franklin tries to find the guy to help Penn State get back to where it needs to be. And to get to where it needs to be, frankly. And you look at the schedule upcoming in 2024. Yeah, Michigan's not on it, but it doesn't get easier.
No.
You've got Ohio State, USC, UCLA,
at
Washington,
Wisconsin, at Minnesota. I mean, they got to go on the road. Yeah.
Yep. So it's going to be, and then you still have a game at West Virginia too. Again, to open the season. So it's going to be a difficult 2024 slate for Penn State to navigate. And for their sake, they're going to be hoping that they have an offense that they can rely on, because they're still going to have talent on that defensive side of the ball, even if there's a few first-rounders that leave.
All right, Donnie, I have enjoyed this live version of the Blue-White Breakdown. Before we wrap it up, I have just 2 things I want to get to with you, just to put in perspective how big of a failure the Penn State offense was in its 2 biggest games of the season. They scored 27 points against Ohio State and Michigan. 2 of those touchdowns were in garbage time when Ohio State and Michigan was, "Hey, you want to throw the ball? Well, hey, you want to score? Just take a minute to do it." Or else it would have been actually far, far worse. One other thing is, you tell me if I'm wrong. Alternate theory. James Franklin fired Mike Yurcich on Sunday because he did not want to get asked by Dave Jones about that ridiculous 2-point try at the end of the game. Am I correct, or am I way off base?
100% correct. That was a fiery, feisty, chippy exchange. And I would expect nothing less of our Dave Jones in a post-game press conference after Penn State loses a big game.
Yeah, and if Dave has you dead to rights, which he did, he is not backing off the gas. And there was really, I don't know what James was. The explanation was, I don't know if I've ever seen a weirder, dumber coaching decision than that one. But that I knew it was coming because you were next to him in the press box with me you actually were on the field. I was with him when it happened, and it was like, a dormant volcano that had sprang to life with lava shooting everywhere. He was so upset, and I knew he wasn't going to let James off the hook. But it wasn't just about Mike Yurcich making bad decisions. on Saturday against Michigan. James made his fair share of bad decisions as well, but we're not talking about that right now. So maybe that is the genius of James Franklin.
Well, Bob, you mentioned being on the sidelines when the second 2-point conversion try, when they lined up for it. I was standing next to John Sauber of the Center Daily Times. Credit to John for breaking the Yurcich story. Really good job by him. I turned and looked at him and I said, Dave Jones is going nuts in the press box right now, sitting next to Bob.
Yeah.
And we just laughed about it. And then, the play they ran was some like,
Keystone
backyard,
yeah.
whatever, phrase I want to say backyard. We're live here, so I can't.
Yeah.
It was some backyard football play, and I don't know what the heck that was.
Yeah.
It was a poor decision, but to try it the way they did. Yeah. Penn State's 8-3, Bob, or excuse me, 8-2. They hope they aren't going to be 8-3 after the Rutgers game. We'll see. We'll see in the coming weeks where all this goes.
That's for the whole fiasco. I don't know what that was. You could have been talking about the 2-point conversion try late in the game, or you could have just talking about Mike Yurcich's offense this year. I don't know what that was.
Did I freeze on you?
No. You said it. You said, I don't know what that was when you were talking about the 2-point try. I think that phrase that you uttered applies to the entirety of Mike Yurcich's play calling in the big games in 2020-23 for Penn State.
I wonder if Keandre Lambert-Smith got the news and started punching air because he doesn't get to throw passes anymore. Because that was a Mike Yurcich special. I don't understand why he was in love with those plays. The flea flicker against Michigan didn't work. The throwback to Drew actually did work. So credit where credit's due. A trick play for Mike Yurcich did work there.
Yeah.
But it was obvious with those two plays and with whatever he tried against Ohio State that this offense needed a spark because it couldn't produce passing plays in its normal sets. Like that's when you have a real issue on offense, is when you have to go to gadget plays that much. And
bad gadget plays too.
Exactly. So yeah, a rough final season, 2/3 of a season, whatever you want to call it, for Mike Yurcich.
Yeah.
As Penn State's offensive coordinator, James Franklin decides now is the time to make the call to can him. And we'll see how this offense responds over the next 2 games and into a bowl game, and where Penn State goes from here, because like we've already hammered home, they need to get this hire right. James Franklin needs to get this hire right.